حالتون چطوره؟ من برگشتم با یه ولاگ دیگه. امروز تور داریم و اینکه بریم ببینیم این تور چجوریه. کلا داونتاون هالیفکسه، این سری متفاوته دیگه با یه حالات اتوبوس توره که هم روی خط زمین میره هم توی آب میره. بریم ببینیم چجوریه. کسایی که تازه وارد چنل من شدن، چنل من رو سابسکرایب کنن، اینستاگرام من رو فالو کنن، آیدیش هم اینجا نوشتم، هم با لینکش توی کامنت ها، و اینکه لایک و شیر یادتون نره و بریم که ببینیم این تور چه شکلیه.
Sorts of different places. So I'm going to shout out some different areas. I want you guys to throw up your hands, give a big shout or cheer if you feel so inclined, and we'll get on our way. Sound good? Perfect. I'll start with locals. Is anyone here from the city of Halifax today? No? Oh, we have a couple. Welcome, folks. Glad to have you on board. I thought I could get away with it there if I just told you guys all fake facts. Don't you worry, I'd never do that to you. Do we have anyone visiting us from the broader province of Nova Scotia? Okay, very nice. Welcome. Glad to have you folks. Anyone visiting us from New Brunswick today? Woo! Whereabouts in New Brunswick, folks? Fredericton, nice. Anyone from Prince Edward Island with us? How about Newfoundland or Labrador? Woo! Two at the back there. Welcome, folks. Anyone visiting us from Quebec? How about Ontario? Okay, whereabouts in Ontario are you guys visiting from? London, very nice. What about at the back here? I heard a shout. Yes, Markham. You. Oh, Brampton, very nice. Anyone visiting us from Manitoba? How about Saskatchewan? Oh, very nice. Welcome. Alberta. Welcome, folks. Glad to have you with us. Anyone from BC? Oh, very nice. All the way from the other coast. We're glad to have you. Anyone representing the territories today? How about any international visitors? Oh, very nice. Where are you guys visiting from? Iran? Welcome. We're glad to have you. I think that covers everyone on board, so once again, welcome to you all. Now, there is one last introduction. We have some flies into the beaches and jungles. Now, the U.S. military built 900 of these vessels at the cost of $900 million. Do the math, $1 million a piece. But despite them being $1 million vehicles, when we got them, they didn't even have seats. So we had to do a few changes to make them tour ready. We did a lovely paint job, made them a little bit more exciting. We installed the finest pleather seating money can buy, just for your comfort. And last but not least, removed the 250 caliber machine guns that sat at the bow and stern of the vessel. You can imagine why we had to do that. Gives us the hardware offer we know it today, and once again, welcome on board. Now there is one last thing I'd like to do before we get into the city history. I would just like to acknowledge that we in Halifax are on unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory. This area was inhabited by the Mi'kmaq people for about 15,000 years prior to European settlers arriving here in 1749. And of course, the name Halifax only came in 1749 as well. Up there and you'll get to right around the top one. Now just beside us we have our City Hall where Mayor Mike Savage does his work out of. It faces onto beautiful Grand Parade Square. This is a great gathering space in the city. Lots of concerts happening here. They've had this stage set up for a while now. Often great musical artists coming through here. They also host formal ceremonies in here, sometimes protests, or you'll see folks just coming down from the surrounding office buildings to enjoy their lunch in the sun. Now just over here, folks, the Fisherman restaurant. The Fisherman was actually the original location of NASCAD University, one of the 5 post-secondary institutions in the city, before it relocated down on Duke Street. Once it got sold off as a school, though, it actually became our city's morgue, and it was the morgue when the Titanic sunk. Many victims from that were brought back to here before they made it to their final resting spot. Now, because of all the bodies that have passed through there over the years, that building has title of one of the most haunted spots in Halifax. Ask anyone who works there. They may have an interesting story or two to tell you, and I guarantee none of them like to go to the upper floor by themselves on a closing shift. Said to be the most haunted section of the building. Now we're just turning onto Brunswick Street, folks. Brunswick Street used to have a different name, though. It was originally called Barrack Street because of the barracks located at the north and south ends of the road where soldiers who worked up in the garrison would live. This was the first formal school to be established in the city, and ever since its doors opened back in 1878, it's been used as a place of education. Now, cool story associated there too with the Halifax explosion. On the day that blast occurred, a teacher and her class were within one of the schoolrooms. The students saw the Mont Blanc burning in the harbor. They ran to the windows to see what was going on, but the teacher, of course, wanted them sitting down doing the schoolwork she had assigned. She asked them back to their seats, and when they returned, she closed the heavy curtains to prevent further distraction. Well, a few minutes later, the explosion went off. All glass in the city imploded, but the heavy curtains in that schoolroom stopped the glass from reaching any of the students. With a little bit of sternness, she managed to save their eyesight and potentially lives. Moral of that story is kids, your teachers do in fact know what they're talking about. Now folks, as we continue to climb Citadel Hill, coming up on the right-hand side of the hill itself, our Old Town clock here. This is one of Halifax's most notable sights. This clock was commissioned by Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, completed in 1803, and believe it or not, it still uses the exact same clock mechanism it was constructed with. That's been keeping time for well over 200 years in the city. Now coming up on the left-hand side of the vessel, we have the main gates of our fort here. This is formerly known as Fort George, and it is the 4th and most elaborate fort that has stood somewhere on this hill. Now, if you wanted to find out a little bit more about Halifax's defense system and the series of forts involved, this is a great first stop. You'll be greeted within by the Living History program. You can learn all about the different roles that would have been held in the fort and how it would have been used. Now, one of the main defensive measures of the fort here, this big, deep ditch, this is a dry moat. And the idea here is that soldiers running up from the bottom of the hill wouldn't see that ditch. Kind of based on the incline, and keep in mind the grass would have been mowed back then, so that certainly would have helped. Now, soldiers, just thinking when they're getting to the top, would tumble in. If they were unlucky enough to have that happen, their luck though was about to get 10 times worse, because soldiers would then be waiting on the inner walls of the fort, pointing their muskets out those windows, and you can take a pretty good guess as to what would happen next. Just up this way, you see some rock that is a bit darker than the others. This is the original building material of our fort, ironstone. Now, ironstone was chosen because it's very resistant to cannon and musket fire. Unfortunately, though, not very resistant to the elements here in Halifax, which is what they didn't take into account. It does rain or snow on average of 170 days per year here, followed by about 100 days of fog. So over time, that stone has eroded quite a bit. It's been gradually replaced with granite, which you can see on some of the other walls around here. And although granite doesn't hold up quite so well to cannon and musket fire, it does a lot better with the elements, which is our main concern nowadays. Point to defend from, but they could actually cross fire upon anyone running up in between the points, so a little bit more effective to defend. Does anyone here want to take a guess as to how many times we've been attacked in Halifax? Oh, good guess at the back there. A grand total, folks, of 0 times. Now, I like to say it's just because Haligonians are so friendly. of course true, but the reality here is that this fort took over 28 years to build. It wasn't finished until 1856. So by that point, not a whole lot we had to worry about defending from. It's been left here as a beautiful historic site. Now folks, if you look up in the fort here, you'll see two tall signaling masts. Now these both had individual purposes. The taller of the two used to signal what ships were coming into port. It's hard to see that flag there now with not so much wind, but that flag up there now represents Gould and Gibson. That would have been a specific company at the time that would have had ships coming in and out of Halifax. So that would have been, now they could get a signal there in a little bit over an hour, which I know for today's standard history. Folks, this is Royal Artillery Park. Now on these grounds, some really interesting buildings. Not only do these grounds house the oldest officers' mess in all of North America, they house the oldest military library in the country and the last original barracks built for the garrison. So some pretty cool stuff in here. Now you can actually do tours of the Cambridge Military Library. They have all sorts of old documents and volumes. If you want to see those yourself, give them a phone call. They don't have a formal tour schedule online. They book tours as there is demand. So give them a ring and I'm sure they'd be happy to hear from you. Alrighty, those of you on the upper right, here is, I know, a little bit shocking for sure, you'd never guess, but there used to be a Centre for Cities Unhoused where the old public library stands, and sadly, with so many people needing that space, they didn't keep up the sanitation very well, and when sicknesses did pass through, there just wasn't the medical care to treat a large amount of people, so many people died when a sickness would spread, and sadly, those graves extend all the way under here, as well as the roadway. Now one designated area for some of those grave sites, the old burying ground here. This opened just one day after those settlers arrived on Halifax shores, and after the first few burials took place, those iron gates were put up quite promptly. People were just dying to get in. Has lots of really neat old buildings. There's some shopping, some restaurants, some different wine bars and other bars, things like that. So lots of cool stuff to see down here, but there's also a lot of older buildings, a lot of registered heritage properties. Now you can identify those because they are marked with a blue or green oval plaque, usually somewhere next to the door or entrance. So that just shows, hey, this building's old, usually gives a little fact about it, says the year it was built and the original name of the building. But it also puts an interesting set of building regulations on these structures, meaning that they have to maintain the historical integrity of the original building. But they can expand as Anglican church. Now when those settlers arrived here, there were two buildings they thought they needed. First was a church, second was a bar. Had their priorities somewhat straight. This was the church that they built, and it took about a year to complete. Construction finished by the summer of 1750. First church service there September 9th of that year, and that actually makes this the oldest place of Anglican worship in all of North America. Still holds active services today, with a pew in there permanently reserved for whoever sits on the throne of England. Queen Elizabeth II's spot is saved whenever she decides to come through the city next. Now, just beside us, we have our town hall, once again from a bit of a different perspective this time. You'll notice there's a level down along the sidewalk here. That's the basement, and it actually used to be our town jail. Now, this jail, once upon a time, imprisoned a famous individual you may have heard of once or twice before, Mr. Harry Houdini, the illusionist, escape artist, and magician. He had a show in the city one evening, supposedly went quite well, so after he thought, why don't I go out, celebrate, have a couple drinks? Well, he had a few too many, and he was arrested for public intoxication. The sheriff picked him up, locked him in there, went home to bed. But early the next morning, citizens in Halifax noticed Houdini walking around the streets without any shoes on. They thought that was rather odd, but went on with their day. Well, it turns out Houdini managed to escape our town jail, but he forgot his shoes while he was at it. He did go back to ask for that pair of footwear. I imagine a little bit of an awkward time, and I'm surprised they didn't just throw him back into the harbor, and then we'll be on our way. folks. Hold on tight. Oh, Mark, that was your biggest one yet, I think. Well, the big splashdown. There you have it, folks. Welcome to the Halifax Harbour. We have just entered here the second largest natural ice-free port in the entire world, second only to the one in Sydney, Australia. Now, I do personally have a bit of a problem with this fact because Sydney, Australia, of course, does not get the winters we do. So I think it is a bit more impressive that we are ice-free. I think we should be number one. But I still haven't figured out who I have to phone about that. So we're number 2 for now. Now, folks, we're also very important for shipping in North America. We actually place 6th for gross tonnage coming in and out of the port per year. So pretty cool. Lots of container ships coming through our waters and lots of transport trucks going through our downtown to get all sorts of goods distributed to the rest of Canada. Now, just over this way, Purdy's Towers, these large glass-covered buildings. Now, they're amongst the most photographed buildings in the city. They're office spaces, but they utilize a really neat cooling system as well. These buildings operate on a geothermal cooling system that was designed by engineers at Dalhousie University. And basically this runs on a series of water-filled pipes. Within the buildings, pipes circulate, absorbing heat from the different rooms and levels. Then using titanium heat exchangers, that heat gets transferred to a series of pipes that lie along the harbor floor. From there, the ocean water itself absorbs this. It actually saves the company about $100,000 every single year in comparison to traditional air conditioning, and they use those savings to invest back into their on-site daycare. So it certainly works out well for them and for the people who use that daycare. It's also a bit more environmentally friendly as well, which is certainly an added bonus. Now, folks, just a little bit up ahead, we have our Harbourfront Marriott Hotel. You'll notice some beautiful murals along the front as well. Those murals are done by local artists here in the city, and they switch up actually every 6 weeks during the summer months, which is pretty cool. The city of Halifax hires the artists to do this, and I think this program is not only great because local artists get to feature their talent and they get paid for doing it, but also it keeps things interesting and exciting for people who are in the harbor or on the boardwalk regularly. Now, they should be switching these over soon. I've been saying that this whole week, but I think they should be doing it soon. So keep an eye out, folks, while you're here. You might get to see those artists in action. It's always kind of cool to see them work. They work very fast, in my opinion. I think it would probably take me 6 months to do a painting that big, but they do it in about 2 hours. So pretty cool to watch. Now, just up over here, we have our historic properties. These are some of the oldest buildings in Halifax. They're also amongst the oldest waterfront warehouses in North America. Now, they're all restaurants, pubs, and shops today, but they were originally utilized as privateer warehouses. Now, if you don't know what a privateer is, I will tell you, and it's a very simple concept to grasp, especially if you already know what a pirate is. Privateers got a letter from the king or queen of their country. It said, you're going to take this boat and crew, I want you to sail the seas, and when you come across a ship that is not owned by us, you can steal and loot from it, and as long as you give us a percentage of whatever you take, all is good. Pirates who were taxed, pretty much. Well, this privateer came to Halifax, Enos Collins, and he actually opened the first bank in the country down in here. Now, over this way, we have our ferry terminal between Halifax and Dartmouth, one on the Halifax side, 2 locations on the Dartmouth side. And this is actually the longest continuously running saltwater ferry service in North America. Started by one man and his rowboat, 2-hour trip one way. So you can imagine with over 200 years of development, we have improved things just a little bit. Takes under 15 minutes now, and you can get on with a bus fare. There's all sorts of stuff to do on our other tour boats. If you guys want to get out on the water with me again, I'd be honored. I am on the craft beer cruise tonight at 7 o'clock, so you'd see me there. We also have a cider cruise, wine cruise, dinner boat. We also do ones with just local musicians coming out, going around the water, just have a little bit of fun out here. So, something for everyone. Now, a little bit further up ahead, folks, you're going to see this large building that has those colorful flags and a banner across the top. This is the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. and this is one of my favorite museums in the city, although I gotta say they're all pretty good. Any provincial museum as well for the rest of August is open to the public for free, so take advantage of it while we still have August here. Those flags across the top, they actually spell an old seafarer's saying, which is fair winds and safe return. And yeah, all sorts of cool stuff to see in here. Largest collection of genuine wooden artifacts from the wreckage of the Titanic. Also have a live parrot in there that you can try and befriend. I haven't had much luck though, just warning you guys. Now just over here we have the HMCS Sackville. This is the last remaining corvette out of an original 200 built and used for World War II. Now you'll notice that blue and white paint job on them. That was done so that it would break up their silhouette on the horizon. A lot of the targeting during the Second World War was purely optical. So if other ships couldn't tell the length of your vessel or what type it was, then it was a lot harder to actually make an accurate aim and sink down another vessel. So the aim here was that paint would break up their silhouette and you couldn't tell the length. These boats did have very dangerous jobs in the Second World War. They were very fast, so they had that on their side, but they escorted convoys across the Atlantic, constantly putting themselves in the line of danger. Of course, these defense mechanisms they had didn't always work, as there is only one left. Now, not only does that boat have the claim to fame of being the last original one, it was also featured right out here in the middle of our harbor. Though one thing I want to talk about, this is George's Island here, home of Fort Charlotte. Now, like I mentioned from the top of Citadel Hill, that would have been the first point of communication with that signaling system. Fort Charlotte would have defended Halifax against any water-based attacks, and it was a very important part of our defense system. There were a few other forts involved in as well. You can actually get over to Fort Charlotte nowadays. They just opened it up at the end of last summer to the public. You can explore the underground tunnels and bunker systems and learn a little bit more about kind of the city being set up as a stronghold for the British colonies. Well, folks, as we head back down the waterfront this way, I'm hopping off the mic for just a few minutes. Gonna grab a drink of water for myself, come in, check on you guys. If anyone would like a photo of the ship, the Mont Blanc. It was carrying a dangerous load of cargo, benzol, picric acid, gun cotton, TNT, thousands of tons of this stuff. Now, there were actually legal limits at the time saying how much you could bring on board of a dangerous good, but it was wartime. Their main concern really was getting those munitions to their final destination as quickly as possible. So the ship was packed to the brim and set on its way. Now, on the other end of our harbor overnight was waiting the Emo, a Norwegian vessel that had ventured this way to pick up some ground was shattered. Now, over 2,000 people died from the explosion, many more wounded though. And you can imagine a lot of those injuries were actually eye injuries because people were looking out their windows at the time of the explosion. Now, as if things couldn't get any worse, the heaviest snowfall in about 40 years hit Halifax that afternoon. People are now homeless, wounded, they've lost their loved ones, they're freezing cold. What on earth were they to do? Well, thankfully, people all around heard about our predicament, but the people of Boston, they actually immediately took to action and went above and beyond the call of duty. They declared a state of emergency in their own city, started loading the train with blankets, medical supplies, window panes, lumber. They even gathered the entire graduate full. When Christmas comes around, we go to the South Shore of Nova Scotia, Balsam fir tree capital of the world. We find the most beautiful fir. We chop it down, ship it to Boston, and there it sits in the Boston Common at Christmas as a symbol of our gratitude. Now, folks, I'll switch gears here a little bit, talk about some of the sea life you see in our harbor. Of course, you see the typical seagulls and cormorants around here in our harbor. We also have a couple different types of seals. We have our harbor brownish tan in color. The gray seals, a little smaller, and they are dark gray. And it's used to train naval officers today. Now you'll also see behind there we have a submarine. That is the HMCS Windsor. HMCS in this situation standing for Her Majesty's Canadian Submarine. There are 4 submarines the Canadian Navy has. The other 3 are on the west coast. They're all called military ship. They can also operate a helicopter there off of it. You can see the helicopter landing pad and a little bit of a hangar. Now, not talking about the Canadian Navy, all ships in the Canadian Navy can actually operate a helicopter except these ones up here, the Kingston class with those 700 numbers on them. The Kingston class, named after my hometown, also called MCDVs, Maritime Coastal Defense Vessels. And that's because they have some really important jobs patrolling the coast and doing certain missions. The 704 dock down there, just a couple of weeks ago, actually got the hot air coming off the engines so that it reduces its infrared heat signature, makes it a little bit harder to spot. Just under the maple leaf and behind that little boat they have there's a flat panel sticking vertically up, and there's some tubular-like objects behind it. Those are actually the evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, and these are probably my favorite on the warships. They shoot up vertically into the air, pitch on their side, evolve to 4 times the speed of sound, and can hit a target over 50 kilometers away. So they are certainly very effective. They also often have harpoon missiles on these boats. They're not on the vessels right now, but those can actually be ejected and hit something as far as the Bay of Fundy. So they have an even greater range, which is pretty crazy and effective. Now over here, the 708, this is the HMCS Moncton, again, one of the Kingston class ships. The 708, it is painted with a heritage paint job, and like the Sackville, which we saw earlier, this was done to break up its silhouette on the horizon so that it wouldn't have been as easily identifiable and then wouldn't have been sunk. There's one ship on each coast with these different paint jobs, so the Moncton here in Halifax, and then there's one in Victoria as well. So that kind of covers the dockyards. Definitely some cool stuff to see. It helps when you know what to look for, and I gotta say and give credit to Mark here, because pretty much everything I've learned about the dockyards, other than the absolute basics, have come from Mark. He spent a number of years in the Navy himself, and he has so much knowledge on all this stuff. He can tell you what every single flag on these boats means, and definitely if you have any more questions about the Navy, folks, I'm sure Mark would be happy to answer them for you. You can come to me, but I think Mark is probably your better resource. So, yeah, thank you, Mark, for teaching me all this cool stuff about the Navy, and I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about it too. Now, we are going to be exiting here once again, folks. Please be mindful. There will be that big bump as we go back over the curb onto the roadway, and please wait to let go of your grip until all 4 wheels are back on the road. Mark's just going to phone in the Halifax traffic, let them know we're out of their hair, and I will be back with you with our next story. Alrighty. Folks, okay, I'm going to tell you the story now of the RMS Titanic. One I always wait to tell until you're on dry land. You can imagine it does make people a little bit uneasy sometimes. But yeah, I know this story is not unique to Halifax, but we do have some very interesting connections. So I'll start with some background so we're all on the same page, get into the Halifax connection, and I hope you guys enjoy. Now, this ship, the RMS Titanic, largest luxury liner of its time, truly remarkable. And of course, there was a lot of publicity and excitement that had been circulating about it. So, lots of people bought tickets. It was nearly a full boat with 2,207 passengers on board when they departed Southampton, England, April 10th, 1912. Now, sailing was all fine the first few days, but on the evening of April 14th, at about 11:40 p.m., the ship struck an iceberg. 2:20 the next morning, fully submerged. Now, I know 2 hours and 40 minutes sounds like a long time, but for a ship of that size, that is really quite short. It should have taken hours longer, and considering they did have to get over 2,000 people off, that is certainly not enough time. Now, a couple contributing factors to the sinking of this vessel. Number 1, the metal that the hull was made out of. They used number 3 wrought iron for the hull, but the standard of boat building was number 4, and these were 2 very different alloys. The number 3 was a lot cheaper, which is probably why they used it, but the number 3 also had a lot more sulfur in it, making it naturally more brittle. In combination with the frigid Northern Atlantic waters, it could have been weakened even further, and that is why some people predict the ship actually broke into multiple pieces as it went down. Now, there is another running theory on what happened when the ship sank, and this will never get concrete proof at this point of time, but there's a lot of evidence that points in this direction, and Titanic historians have kind of done some deliberating about this, and they think this is a pretty solid guess. Now, supposedly, there was a furnace fire on board the Titanic, not the night the ship went down, but a couple days into travel. And this fire would have potentially warped metal doors in the underbelly of the ship. Now, in the construction of the Titanic, those doors had been put in place so that if damage did occur, they could seal them, keep the damage isolated to one very specific spot. The rest of the boat would have been safe. If those doors were already warped, by the time water started flooding in, it could have been stopped and it would have traveled further than they expected, contributing to a faster sinking. Of course, after the ship went down, many people were in lifeboats, many more in the water itself, folks. And you can imagine that would be an absolutely freezing cold swim. You would not want to spend any significant amount of time in water like that at all. Hypothermia would have set in quite quickly. Sadly, we here in Halifax, being an ice-free port, we were the nearest available port actually to send ships out of to the sinking point, but we were also 630 nautical miles away. By the time any of our vessels could travel over 1,200 kilometers and make it there, it had been multiple days, and of course by then a recovery mission rather than a rescue. It was remains and artifacts that were brought back here to the city. Now, to touch on the remains first, those were placed in 3 separate cemeteries, the largest being the Fairview Lawn up on Windsor Street. A lot of people will refer to it as the Titanic Cemetery. Locals will know what you mean, but Google Maps will not. So if you want to get there, remember Fairview Lawn Cemetery. Cool spot to check out for sure. Now, like I mentioned, we also have the largest collection of genuine wooden artifacts from the Titanic anywhere in the world at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. They have a full wooden deck chair. They have a replica too that you can actually sit in and test out to see just how comfy it was. Not very, but go find out for yourselves. You got to be the judge of that. Now, one gentleman who actually has been to both those locations, director of the 1990s film, The Titanic, Mr. James Cameron. Quick show of hands, who here has seen that movie? Okay, very good. So he was here in the city. They actually did 80% of the filming for that movie in Halifax, and he had time to go to both those spots. Time continues on a little bit, the movie comes out, and the lovable main character, Mr. Jack Dawson, steals the hearts of North America. Well, people started putting facts together quite quickly. They knew James Cameron had been to the Fairview Lawn, and then word got out there's a headstone in there with the name J. Dawson inscribed on it. What does that mean? That Jack Dawson and his story, 100% factual. People flooded to the Fairview Lawn. They left love letters, tufts of hair, cried tears over the grave. But a historian heard about this, and he wasn't so convinced. He decided he would do some research. Well, upon doing this research, he quickly found out the man buried in the Fairview Lawn was named Joseph. Joseph just so happened to be a stoker in the furnaces of the Titanic. Maybe he could have told us a little bit more about that fire that broke out. You can imagine that bit of news, though, did burst a few people's bubbles, couple less visits to Joseph's graveside. But in Halifax, we weren't quite ready to let go of the money-making opportunity associated with that name. Jack Dawson's Ice Cream proceeded to open up on the boardwalk. However, after the first summer, it too went under. Last bad joke you have to hear from me, folks. Thank you so much for coming on board. Did you have a good time today?